Episode 1. The Verse Without Ink. They say the word of God is written in ink, but Elijah didn't see ink. He saw breath, cold, invisible breath rising from a blank page whispering back to him. It was the first Sunday Elijah agreed to clean the old chapel alone. The priest had fallen ill. The acolytes were away on retreat. So the church empty, dim, echoing with dust and moth-winged silence was his responsibility. And that's when he found the wall. Behind the altar, a thin crack ran across the stone. He touched it. The stone moaned softly and gave way, like it had been waiting for someone to notice. Inside, tucked into a hollow carved by hands older than the church itself, was a Bible, but not one like he'd ever seen, bound in deep red leather, dry as forgotten skin, no title, no cross, just a single black thread tying it shut. He opened it slowly. Most of the pages were worn, scripture familiar, secret, comforting, but then came a page that made his breath catch. It was blank, not smudged, not faded, empty, and yet his lips began to move. He didn't understand the language. It didn't even feel like speech, more like something crawling out of his ribs. He spoke 5 lines. Each word cut the silence sharper than the last, and with the final syllable, the chandelier shook. All the candles in the chapel went out and reignited. By themselves, Elijah stumbled back, clutching the Bible, his heart like thunder beneath his ribs. He flipped back to the page, still blank, but there was a smell in the air. Not smoke, ashes, not incense, something burning beneath the skin of the world. That night, he tried to forget. He prayed harder than ever before, but the moment his eyes closed, he saw the page again, and it was no longer blank. It glowed red in his dreams, and at the center of the words, something pulsed, like a heartbeat made of light. When Elijah woke, his pillow was wet, not with sweat, with blood. Episode 2. The Town That Forgot God. It started small, a prayer left unfinished, a crucifix taken down for dusting, never put back up. But by the 7th day after Elijah read the verse, faith had become silence, and silence had begun to rot. No one noticed at first. The old man who always rang the chapel bell at noon forgot what time it was. The baker who kneaded his dough while whispering psalms couldn't recall a single verse. Even the children will once bowed their heads before meals began to eat with their eyes wide open, as if waiting for something to interrupt them. Elijah watched all of this from the corner pew. He hadn't told anyone about the verse, not the priest, not the bishop, not even the wind that blew through the cracked stained glass window. He kept the book hidden beneath the floorboards of his small, creaking home, but he could feel it, the words, still moving, not on paper, but inside him. On the 6th night, he walked to the church, not to pray but to listen, to test a theory. He stood in the pulpit, spoke the opening line of John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the moment he said it, every candle in the chapel went out. Again, the darkness pressed against his chest like it was breathing. But this time, it spoke, not aloud, not in words, in memory, a flash of the town square empty, a flash of the confessional, but the shadow inside was not human, a flash of the altar cracked straight down the middle, bleeding wax that looked far too red. Then, just as quickly, light returned. The candles were lit, the pews were empty, the silence louder. When Elijah walked home, he saw a boy on the steps of his porch, one of the altar boys, crying, I forgot the Lord's Prayer. The boy whispered, I say it every night. I know it by heart, but tonight, it's gone. And in his palm, the boy held something, a torn scrap of paper with a single word written in thick, black script, unspoken. Elijah took the paper, and for the first time in his life, he doubted if silence was holy. Episode 3. Thus in the confession booth. They say confession is a door, but no one ever asks what might be on the other side, waiting not to forgive, but to listen. It was Thursday morning when Father Dominic returned from his hospital bed, pale, hunched, and slower than usual, but with the same tired kindness in his eyes. Elijah helped him into the sacristy, offered tea, and tried not to show how hollow the chapel had become since the reading of the verse. I'll resume confessions today, the old priest said. Elijah hesitated. Maybe, not yet, Father. Father Dominic raised an eyebrow. People need to be heard. Elijah, That never changes, but something had changed. And that evening, as the sun collapsed behind the chapel's spire, the first confessor came, or so it seemed. Elijah watched from a distance. He saw the shadow slip into the booth fluid, quiet, too tall. He thought it must be a man in a coat, but no one entered through the doors. No footsteps echoed, just presence. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Father Dominic did not emerge. When Elijah finally stepped forward and knocked softly on the priest's side of the booth, the door creaked open. Empty. The other side, also empty, but the seat Father Dominic's seat was still warm, and on the small shelf between the screens, where penitent hands usually rested in trembling guilt, lay a rosary, knotted, melted, dripping wax. That night, Elijah returned to the chapel alone. He checked the security tapes. At 6:03 p.m., the screen went black, static, and when it returned 5 minutes later, Father Dominic Saturday alone inside the booth, whispering, not to a penitent, to the wall. His hands clutched the melted rosary, his eyes worn closed in prayer. They were wide open, unblinking, and then, something impossible. He nodded, not once, not twice, but 7 times, as if agreeing to something. Then, he vanished from the frame. No exit, no sound, just absence. Elijah rewound the footage, paused, zoomed in, and saw them, 2 eyes, in the confessor's side, not human, not shaped for light, just there, watching. Episode 4. The statues that blinked. They were carved to watch over the faithful, but now, they watch something else. Not the living, not the lost, but the one who read the verse. Elijah first noticed it with the Virgin Mary, a small statue near the entrance of the chapel, hands in prayer, head tilted in eternal sorrow. Every morning for years, she had greeted him with the same marble stillness, but not that morning. Her gaze had shifted, slightly but unmistakably. It no longer looked toward the altar. It looked directly at Elijah. He frowned, touched her face, cold, untouched. He stepped away, walked down the aisle, and past St. Peter's statue. It, too, seemed different. The beard, longer, the eyes, more open. No, that was impossible. Stone doesn't change. Stone doesn't feel aware. He turned sharply. No movement, but the air. It felt heavier, pressing, as if something had entered with him, and was now standing behind every statue, wearing their skin like a mask. That night, the church felt colder than usual. Elijah lit candles along the nave, not out of ritual, out of fear, and that's when he saw it. The statue of Saint Michael, the one with the flaming sword raised against the serpent, had a tear on his cheek. He approached slowly. The tear was not stone. It was wet, real, and beneath the angel's bare foot where the serpent's head was carved in defeat there was now a crack, a hairline fracture across the serpent's eye. Elijah touched the tear. It was warm. He whispered, "What are you seeing?" And a sound answered. Not words, not footsteps, just stone, grinding, breathing. Behind him, every candle went out at once. The church fell into blackness, and in that dark, Elijah didn't dare turn around, but he felt them. Every statue, facing him, their stone eyelids, no longer sealed. Episode 5. The day Elijah wasn't there. They say you know you've gone mad when others stop seeing what you see, but Elijah had not gone mad. He had simply disappeared, and others had seen him anyway. It was a Friday. Elijah was supposed to meet the bishop at noon. He never showed up. His house remained locked from the inside. His bed untouched. The Bible still hidden beneath the floorboards was warm, not room temperature, warm, as if it had just been held. They searched for him all day. No footprints, no message, no sign of struggle. But then, reports began to drift in. In the next town over, a florist claimed she saw a man in robes speaking in the park. He stood on the edge of the fountain, reciting something in a voice that made pigeons scatter mid-flight and made dogs howl from blocks away. His words were not English, nor Latin. She said it was like hearing her soul trying to scream. 3 hours later, in a different village, a dying man in hospice sat her day up and whispered to the nurse, "He's here, the one who read what was sealed." And just before his heart stopped, he added, "But he's reading different endings now." Back in Elijah's town, Father Dominic gathered the remaining congregation for prayer, but when he reached for the Bible, he found a different book on the altar. Not the parish Bible, the red one, the one no one should have touched. Its pages had changed. The once blank sheet now held 3 verses in script that shimmered when looked at directly but disappeared when copied. Father Dominic tried to speak them aloud, but his tongue would not move. His throat locked, his breath refused to come, and behind him, one of the old women fainted. She had seen Elijah's face flicker in the stained glass window from the inside. But it wasn't his full face. Half of it was light. The Otherush. That night, the church bells rang at 3:33 a.m. No one was there to ring them, but on the chapel door, someone had etched in charcoal, "I'm not where you left me. I'm where the verse needed a voice." Elijah, episode 6, the woman who heard the verse backwards. Some say prophecy is a mirror, but what happens when you look into it from the wrong side? When the words echo backward and still pierce the soul. Her name was Almareus, blind since birth. But that night, she saw, not with her eyes, with her blood. The bishop had brought her in quietly. No one else in the town dared listen to the strange recordings anymore, not since the verse had begun replaying itself through static, wind, and whispering walls. But Alma, a woman of deep faith and sharper intuition, agreed. They placed the old recorder in front of her, the one salvaged from Elijah's pulpit after his disappearance. It had captured the verse once, weeks ago. Only one man dared play it back. It bled from the ears. Alma didn't flinch. She placed her hand on the machine and said, "Let it speak." The tape rolled. Nothing for 10 seconds. Then breath. Then a verse, but in reverse. The words weren't merely backward. They were alive in reverse. They crawled inward, then time, and halfway through, Alma gasped. She began to shake. Her mouth opened, but it wasn't her voice that came out. He read what even heaven feared to write. Her body convulsed. The verse was not a message, it was a memory. Blood trickled from her nostrils. It was never meant for man. And then her eyes, the ones that I had never seen, rolled open. Pupils full white. And she whispered, "He read it forward." But I just saw what happens when the verse finishes reading him. She collapsed. Silence. When the bishop rushed to her side, Alma smiled faintly and said, "He's close." Then she pointed straight at the chapel wall. They looked. Nothing there. But when they returned the next morning, the wall bore handprints, 7 of them, in perfect reverse, as if someone or something had pushed from the other side. Episode 7, the cross that refused to hang. Faith hangs on wood, but when the wood begins to reject the nails, and the nails begin to scream, something sacred has already shattered. The cross fell during morning prayer. No wind, no tremor, just a sound snap. Funk. Silence. It lay at the foot of the altar, face down, not broken, just dropped, as if something unseen had unhooked it with intent. The bishop bent to lift it. The nail holes in the wall were intact. The nails themselves were curled, twisted, as though the wood had pushed them out. That evening, Elijah's house was searched again. They found the hidden Bible beneath the floorboards, hotter than before. When one of the officers touched it, he cried out and dropped it, whispering, "It's not fire, it's breathing." Back at the church, they rehung the cross, reinforced it, bolted it deep into stone. It stayed for 3 hours. Then, during confession, it fell again. This time, mid-homily, the bishop had just spoken the words, and he hummed for our sins. Crash. The sound was final, not like an object falling, but like something being rejected. And it wasn't the only one. Overnight, every cross in the church, on the walls, on the altar, even those etched into glass, either fell, cracked, or disappeared entirely. The only one that remained untouched was carved into the cover of the red Bible. The next morning, the church carpenter, Matteo, tried to replace the altar crucifix. A calm, stoic man, he brought a new cross, freshly carved. But when he lifted it, a drop of blood fell from the beam. Not his, not from a wound, from the wood itself. He stared. Another drop, then a third. He turned the cross over. Nothing, but on the floor, where the blood touched, words began to burn into the marble, words in no language Matteo recognized. The bishop was called. He approached slowly. As he did, a breeze swept through the church. No windows open, no wind outside, just one sound, riding on the air. You cannot hang what has already descended. And from the wall behind the altar, a crack split downward like lightning from seen in stone. Elijah's name was carved inside it, not by hand, by pressure. Episode 8, the book that burned without fire. Some books are made of paper, some are made of flesh, but this one was written in silence, sealed in breath, and knew it's starting to burn without flame. It happened just after midnight. The red Bible locked away in the chapel's tabernacle, under orders from the bishop, began to smoke. Not from heat, not from fire, from inside. Altar boy Nichols was the first to see it. He had returned to the chapel, unable to sleep, drawn by a dream where Elijah stood in front of the altar, whispering a verse in reverse, then bleeding from the mouth. In the dream, Elijah pointed at the tabernacle, so Nichols obeyed. What he saw made him collapse to his knees. The brass door was cold to the touch, but every breath he took near it came out in white fog, as if the Bible inside was changing the temperature of the air around it. He opened it. No flame, no ember, but smoke, thick, black, curling upward from the book's spine. The cover hadn't burned. It had peeled, like dead skin, and beneath the leather, Nichols saw it, a second cover, not made of paper, but of something that pulsed faintly. He ran. By the time the bishop arrived, the chapel stank of salt and something older than rot. He ordered everyone out, closed the doors, approached the book alone, and when he touched it, he screamed, because his hands didn't just feel the book, they heard it. A sound vibrated through his bones, chanting, but not human, not angelic, somewhere in between. The bishop dropped the book. Pages fell open, but none of them turned with the wind. They turned in rhythm, as if being read by invisible fingers. The open page showed a verse, one no scholar had ever seen, written in ash, and the prophet shall vanish, and his breath shall be caught in the throat of heaven, until the sky forgets who first opened it. The bishop tried to tear the page out, but his hands would not move. And, 10, a voice, not from the book, but from behind the altar. You were not chosen to protect it. You were chosen to witness it. The bishop turned. No one there, but carved across the wall now, in the same ash text, this book does not burn to die. It burns to be born. Episode 9, the boy who knew the end. You can teach a child to pray, but what if a child is born, already knowing the final prayer of one that ends all others? His name was Samuel. He was 7. He had never spoken a word in his life. Doctors called it trauma. His mother called it a blessing. But after what happened in room 17 of the orphanage, no one called it anything anymore. They just listened. That night, as the nun tucked him into bed, the lights flickered. Not once, not twice, 7 times. The other children complained of cold, of whispers in the vents, of dreams filled with smoke and bleeding angels. But Samuel just stared at the ceiling. And then he spoke. One sentence, clear, monotone. Elijah has opened a last breath. The nun dropped the candle. When she turned to ask him what he meant, Samuel was already sitting up, his pupils completely white. He reached under his blanket and pulled out a sheet of paper. No one knew how it got there. No one ever saw him write it, but on it were 5 lines. The same verse Elijah had read, only now it had an ending. Lines not heard before. And worse, his lips moved before the paper was read. He wasn't reciting the verse. The verse was reciting him. Across town, the bishop awoke screaming at the same moment. The Bible had opened on its own, and across the ash-covered page, new ink began to form matching Samuel's paper exactly. Only Samuel had never seen the Bible, and the verse was growing longer. The final line shook the nun to her knees. And the child shall remember what the prophet forgot. The price for unsealing a silence shaped like God's regret. Samuel's voice changed, deeper, older. He said, I was born at the end of the prayer. Now it's time to breathe it backwards. That night, lightning split the sky. It didn't strike a tree. It struck the chapel. The steeple collapsed, and beneath the rubble, carved into the stone foundation, were 5 words no chisel had made. He northeast W before he breathed. Episode 10, the name that was never meant to be said. Some name someone, some name seal, but there is one name older than creation. buried beneath every silence that was never meant to be spoken by the mouth of man. It appeared in the ash, not in ink, not in blood, but in the fine black dust left behind after the chapel steeple collapsed. One word, unpronounceable, but somehow readable. Father Dominic stared at it, the letters bent and curved like they were still alive, curling into a shape that seemed to echo even when no one spoke it aloud. He didn't try to pronounce it, but Elijah had. They found a recording, not from a camera, from a dream. The bishop awoke screaming, covered in sweat, certain he'd heard someone whisper into his ear as he slept. The voice wasn't Elijah's, but the breath was. And on the tape recorder beside his beta device, untouched in over a decade, was a new file. Timestamp 3:33 a.m. Static. Then wind. Then Elijah's voice. The verse was never the danger. It was the name hidden inside it. And now, I've said it. What followed was silence. But the kind of silence that hurts. That fills the ears with pressure. That makes the bones ache. Then came the sound of weeping, but not human, as if something somewhere had just remembered its own name after forgetting it for thousands of years. That morning, across every Bible in the town, every hotel drawer, every church pew, every digital upon line appeared when opened. The one who says it will not die. He will echo. Samuel, the mute boy, began to scream. His voice cracked into 3 tones at once as a song. Elijah's, and another one ancient and grieved. He spoke the name once, and every crucifix in the building shattered. The nuns fled. The bishop tried to seal the chapel, but the name was already written everywhere, in condensation on windows, in smoke rings from extinguished candles, even in the pattern of dust on the floor, and in the mirror above the altar. One phrase was now etched. You did not read it, it read you, and now it remembers what it was. Episode 11. The prophet who tried to rewrite God. You can burn a page, tear a book, but what happens when the verse is not written in ink, but in the breath of your soul? What happens when you try to write over God? They found him in the hills. Elijah, alive, or something close to it. His hair had grown white, his hands were burned, the fingertips blackened and trembling, but his eyes looked like they had seen the end of time, and chosen to return anyway. He did not speak at first. He only wrote, in blood, on parchment made of animal skin, spread across the broken altar stones in the chapel ruins. A new verse, a counter-verse. Unwrite me, unwind what I breathed, seal the mouth that echoed the name. The bishop approached him slowly. Who told you to write this? Elijah turned. His voice was sand. No one. Then he paused, looked to the shattered cross above them, and whispered. It wasn't a command. It was a mercy. He opened the red Bible, but now, the pages fought him. They flipped against the wind's direction. They bled along the edges. The ink slithered. The verse refused to be outwritten. So Elijah did the unthinkable. He opened his palm with a shard of broken stained glass and wrote over the verse in his own blood. The moment the first word touched the page, the entire chapel trembled. Paintings fell. Statues cracked. A scream low, distant, like a dying trumpet echoed through the rafters. The red Bible tried to close itself, but Elijah forced it open and spoke one line aloud. I returned the name to silence. Then everything stopped. The candles went out. The smoke disappeared. And for one breathless second, the verse disappeared. Blank, pure, as if creation itself had held its breath. But then, the page glowed. A new sentence wrote itself above Elijah's blood. You cannot rewrite what wrote you. His eyes went wide. He fell to his knees. And for the first time, he wept. Not from pain, but from the awful truth. It wasn't prophecy. He whispered. It was authorship. And he was not the writer. He was the pen. Episode 12. The verse that breathed one last time. Most scriptures are read. Some are whispered. But this one was never meant to be spoken. Because once the final word is spoken, the verse doesn't end. It exhales. It happened during dusk. The sky over the chapel had turned a deep red, like wine spilled across parchment. The wind stood still. No leaves rustled. No birds dared fly. It was the kind of silence that didn't belong to earth. Elijah stood alone at the altar ruins, the red Bible in his hands. Trembling, the book was open to the final page. The verse that had never existed when he read into reality now had one line left to complete. A line unwritten, but not unbreathed, because with every gasp Elijah took, the sentence seemed to fill itself. Not in ink, not in blood, in breath. The bishop arrived. So did the boy, Samuel. The townsfolk kept their distance, watching from behind broken pews and crumbling walls. They knew this moment wasn't for them. It was for the verse and its vessel. Elijah looked up, tears streaking down a face no longer young, no longer entirely human. I was never chosen to read it, he whispered. I was born to let it speak. He inhaled, and the Bible sighed. The final line appeared across the page like a shadow moving through fog. When the last breath is spoken, let heaven shut its ears, for what follows is not prophecy, but reply. Suddenly, the ground shuddered, not an earthquake, a heartbeat. From beneath, the chapel's foundation cracked, the steeple ruins groaned, and, turn, the verse read itself aloud. No one's lips moved. The sound came from there, from the walls, from the bones of those watching. A voice that wasn't a voice, a breath that wasn't from lungs, a scripture that wasn't read, but remembered. Samuel collapsed, whispering through cracked lips, "It's not a message, it's a door." And Elijah, eyes wide, arms open, exhaled his final breath. The Bible turned to ash, and in its place, where the book had rested, stood a mirror. But the reflection was not Elijah. It was you.